Kia Sperry says, "Hey Dan, I've always wondered about the number of your characters' names, and their references. I've noticed that some names fit the character or regiment, like Larkin the Tanith, Larkin the Poet, or the Volpons being Blue Bloods. Do you name them for the character mannerisms, or do you form them around the names?" All sorts of different things. First of all, I collect in my ubiquitous notebooks, I collect character names all the time, and I use them where they seem appropriate. I get great names that I realise could never be a 40k name. They end up in different places, and I get some names that that lend themselves to particular types. I mean, there are names that nowadays I know if a name is likely to be a Tanith name or not, or a Belladon name or whatever. There are certain naming conventions. A lot of the Tanith, for instance, have Muk at the beginning of them. I know that's, so that has that Celtic thing going on. But so some of them. Pretty much, I also collect names at game stations and stuff like that. I collect the names of people who come up to get their books signed if they would like to be killed off at any point in a book. And in fact, it's got to the stage now when some of them aren't just getting killed off; they're becoming major characters. So when I take down their names, I sort of earmark them immediately as to whether they're going to be a 40k name or a Warhammer name or a Marvel name, or it depends what. I mean, Tim Huckleberry, for instance, who I've known for many years since he was at Games Workshop in the States, always wanted to use his name in a book. I don't think Huckleberry works even with a phonetic spelling. Can't make it work in 40k, which is why he's embedded, because it doesn't work in a 40k term. So he's got his combat SF, but it's not the 40k universe. David said, "Hello Dan, when you're naming characters, do you try to come up with consistent sounding names for different cultures?" I've just answered that, but yes I do. Do I ever take my inspiration from real world cultures? Absolutely I do. I mean, that was the Tanith thing in the first place, and has done in other ways. I mean, really, if you get any kind of cultural flavour to something like the Iron Snakes or something, you end up sort of borrowing from that cultural pool. You can see that certainly in Prospero Burns with the all the Fenrisian names. You can see that in Thousand Sons with the way Graham's naming the Thousand Sons. Oddly enough, Jesus or Jesus says, "Dan, of all the characters you've written about, which do you feel have the closest attachments and similarities to yourself?" That's quite difficult. There are various characters that I sort of deliberately, but with my tongue firmly in my cheek, have sort of pretended are me, and they don't actually bear very much resemblance to me at all. I always joked that I was Harlan Nale I was Harlan Nale's overweight, unfit younger brother probably. But yes, the shaven head and all that kind of stuff. The two characters that I guess I always think of as myself. One is Biota in the Gaunt book, who's the tactician who is Van Voigt's advisor, who also is the author of the overall history of the Crusades that we referred to several times. Note, he's a chronicler, which I suppose is why I identify with him. There's no other reason than that. It's just that he's the sort of super narrator in all the stories. He's the guy who writes the bit at the beginning of every Gaunt book, in a world of fire and ice, that kind of stuff. So I've always identified with him. And in Triumph, Beaver, who is, funnily enough, the guy who's narrating it and writing the story, I also relate to. I don't know whether every character who is actually based on me has to have a name beginning with B, and why it should be B, I don't know. I hope that answers that question. Alex said, "Hi Dan, I'm always impressed by the vast descriptive lexicon you draw upon when setting the scene in your 40k novels, particularly the Eisenhorn and Ravenel trilogies. Speaking of which, any hints when the next Inquisitor series is coming out?" Breath. Yes, already covered that. "Can you give us any hints or tips for aspiring writers on how you amass the kind of vocabulary that you use when writing for Inquisitor?" I read a lot, and as I've already done this gesture to camera once already, little black books. Filled them with just stuff all the time, and in fact sometimes I bring them home and then I convert the contents to larger books like this. This is the operating book for the latest novel. The point is, I collect words, phrases, names, ideas all the time, and sometimes I sort of repurpose them for science fictional needs. If I come up with a name or something and I think that's interesting, I might find a way of doing it. I love obscure words. I don't love obscure words for the sake of obscure words. I think it just becomes incredibly indulgent and dull if you just stuff a book full of words that are just because they're odd words. But sometimes, in order to evoke a scene or a sort of cultural background. This is true in Triumph. It's also true in Prospero Burns, where I've deliberately tried to pick up on vocabulary to create a landscape that is specific to that book. So there's an awful lot of very obscure words in Triumph that are deliberately Elizabethan to build up the kind of Elizabethan feel, and there's an awful lot of words that are coming from sort of Norse and from Northern European, Scandinavian countries, and also particularly Iceland. There's some sea monsters in Prospero Burns that are named after mythological Icelandic sea monsters. They're just great words. They all sound like the volcano that stopped the flights over the UK, and I just thought that's great because it means that it makes the Fenrisians not specifically Viking, but generally sort of that whole Northern Atlantic Scandinavian thing. So it makes them slightly less specific. So that kind of thing. Yeah, there are all sorts of great words that I've written down. Here's another book here, full of great words. This one's actually annotated, so I know where I think those words are going to be used eventually. And some of them I haven't had a chance to use. So every now and then I flick through my notebooks and I see a word and I keep going, "Oh, that's such a good word! I can't wait to use that one." And I'm sort of saving them up for the moment where they have the most armour-piercing impact, really. It's no point getting a really good word and then throwing it away on some little thing. You know, sort of. There are some words that are so good they could hold up the entire plot of an Inquisitor novel because they'd be the name of the bad guys, and it'd be such a good word that you just want to read the whole thing. Patrick said, "Do you enjoy writing comic books or novels more?" I enjoy writing them both. I enjoy them in very different ways. And I literally split my days between the two of them because I don't want to get stuck doing one at the expense of another. I love writing prose. Prose is more demanding because for the simple reason it takes longer. You can get if you sit down and spend a couple of days writing an issue of something in a comic, you get the huge satisfaction of closure of finishing that job in a reasonable length of time. A novel will take months, and therefore you're sort of chipping away at it on a daily basis. And although the actual writing process is very enjoyable, the overall mental demands of holding onto the plot and developing it and keeping going, the stamina involved is demanding. Which is more satisfying to see on the shelf, he adds. Probably the novels. For that very reason, because they represent a more significant chunk of time working. Although, you know, that's not to say I'm not delighted when I see a comic come out. And I don't know. I enjoy them both. That's why I do them both, I think. Mike's has another question. How do you write for a character that is smarter than you are? I asked my wife.